Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ryan the Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? I am Ryan the Ride Mechanic. Thank you for coming back for another video. Today we're going to be doing sounds of rides. And this is going to be a fun one because there's nothing better than showing up to a park and you get out of the car, you get out of wherever you're going, you get there and you can stand there sometimes before the park opens and you can just sit there in the quietness and just listen in the still air, and you can hear those rides running. And sometimes you could pick out that one ride that you know that you love. So it's just like, oh man, I hear it, it's running. You might not even be able to see it, but you might be able to hear it, and it's like, yep, it's running. Let's go get on that thing. Nothing worse than showing up to the front gate, right? And that thing says, oh, down for the day. It's like, oh man, why does it make that noise? Why does it sound like that? I've had some viewers ask me questions, and some of them even stumped me. I was like, I don't know what that is. But I found out, so we're going to find out today. So the first one I want to go over is a pretty simple one. It's actually one you can hear all the time on YouTube, and it's how you know that an awesome video is going to be starting. Let's hear it.
Now get ready, here we go.
That was a pretty awesome intro. I liked it myself. Okay, one of the first ones I've got is someone contacted me and said, hey, what's this screeching sound I hear when these rides start? And I kind of went back and forth. I'm like, what do you mean this screeching? It's like, well, it's like a squealing. It's like a really high-pitched vibration, something like that. It sounds really weird. I'm like, can you give me a ride name and like where you hear it? And they're like, oh yeah, sure. I honestly don't remember the ride, but they're like, when this ride dispatches. I'm like, okay. So I found it on YouTube and I started listening to it. And I was like, this is a sound that they hear. Do you know what that is? Probably heard it on a lot of rides. I mean, it happens all over the place. So that is the sound of all the drive motors in the stations. It could be a lifting motor, depending on what type of ride it is. But in the back, there is a piece of equipment that runs that motor, and that is called a variable frequency drive, or VFD. The VFD, as it ramps up and slows down, makes that noise. So motors, when they're running on power, typically AC, they run off of how many hertz or how many cycles per second of AC goes through the motor. So if you just plug a motor into a wall, like a drill motor or something like that, it runs off of 60 hertz because that's what the wall is putting out. Well, here in the US it is anyway. So we're putting out 60 hertz of power out that cord, and then if it's a variable control on the motor, like can speed up and slow down, it's typically done off of current. So we vary how much amperage, how much current can flow through the motor, and that will speed up or slow down the motor accordingly. So what we do on amusement rides is we take the current and vary that to give us the torque, but we also use the pulses per second and actually slow them down to make the motor run slower. So as it starts at a slow hertz, it will start at like 15 or 20 hertz, 15 or 20 cycles per second. And as that goes off, it starts to give you that really high-pitched chirping sound. And you'll see as things accelerate and deaccelerate, that chirping sound gets more frequently and comes up to like a whine, and then it slows back down. So all that is the induction into the motor, but it's coming from the VFD, or variable frequency drive. So here's some examples of it. Listen to this. Any idea what that is? So where this came up is a viewer contacted me and said, hey, there's this ride, this one I do remember, there's this ride, Silver Bullet at Knott's Berry Farm. I've been on that ride, it's a good ride. They said when it's going in and out of the station, it's making this thumping sound, and I don't know where it's coming from. So I said, okay, let me look at it. I mean, I'll see if I could figure that out. So I started looking at the video, and I started watching. I have to watch a lot of off-ride videos for these things. And it started, and I finally found it. It's like, oh, there's the sound. And I started listening to it, and I'm going, okay, what is that sound? Huh. Is there something in the track? No. There's nothing that counts. There's nothing counting in there. I started listening to the rhythmic thumping that the ride was making as it was dispatching. And I'm thinking, okay, is it running over a gap in the track? Because sometimes that happens. It makes a thumping noise as the wheels pass over. And then I paid attention to it, and I'm like, is it something with the wheel carriers? Well, this was a B&M ride, so I know there's 8 sets of wheel carriers. So I'm listening for it as it goes out, and it's going, I can hear the thump, and I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Where's the 8th one? Why is there not 8? There's only 7. Why would it be 7? Well, and then I started watching trains coming into the station, because I was just focused on trains leaving the station. And I started watching trains coming into the station. And then what was surprising was when the trains went out of the station, they made that thumping noise, and then when they came into the station, they made that thumping noise again. And I was honestly like, what the heck is doing that? And I was kind of thinking about it for a second. I'm like, why is there only 7 if there's 8 wheel carriers? 1 in front, 1 behind, but that wouldn't make sense with the train coming in. I was like, what is going on? Then I realized, oh, there's 7 hitch openings. That's what that is, because you have 1 hitch per coach, right? You say, well, there's 8 coaches. Yeah, the pilot coach assembly, coach number 1 to coach number 2, there is no hitch opening in that area. So what that actually is, and this is the one that took me a while to actually figure out, what that is as the booster wheels, the pinch wheels in the station, as they are driving the train forward, when those wheels come to a gap where the hitch is, the wheels bottom out. So one thing I was used to is I was used to working on a floorless coaster. So on the floorless coaster, there is nothing in there. It's simply pivot at the bottom with an adjustment knuckle on top. And when those wheels hit the center hub assembly or the hitch assembly, there was no bumping or thumping in that area. They simply just went past it. So what this was is this is more of a spring in the assembly. Not an actual spring, but more like the inverts have rubber bushings inside of there, because some of those inverts, it's really predominant when you hear it go by. So that's what that sound is. As it's passing by, it's the booster wheels collapsing ever so slightly in the hitch areas as they pass by, and there is only 7 openings for the hitch as a train passes by. So now you can listen to that here. That last one on Raptor, that was pretty loud. It's like, wow, that's almost like a metal on metal noise that ride was making. bushings, adjustments, all sorts of stuff can affect rides and how they sound. So that was interesting to find out, though. I had never paid attention to that, though, but now that I've keened into it, it's like, oh yeah, I've heard that all over the place on all sorts of inverted rides. I guess I just never thought much of why that noise was there. Okay, so the next noise, can you tell what this is? That's one style. Here's another style. Okay, so the first style is a LSM launch, linear synchronous motor launch. This one is done by Intamin, though, and it's really quite interesting because the two launches that I've picked, the second one is also an LSM launch. The two launches they're both LSM launches, so it's the same drive principle, but the execution is done different. One is a drive system that Intamin uses for pretty much everything on their rides, and the other one is made by, let's see, that one, if I recall properly, is InDrive Tech. If I'm thinking about that right, man, I should really research stuff before I do this. The second one is made by Intrasys. It's the Slimline LSM stators, and those are the ones I'm really used to working on. So again, here is the first one. And that is Red Force at Ferrari Land. Here is West Coast Racers at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Quite interesting, right? Yeah, so the first one has that much deeper, you could hear the hum in the background, but it's more of a growl. So that tells me that they're dumping more current at a lower frequency through those stators. I don't know if honestly that's correct, but it's just a deeper growl sound to it. It makes me think that there's just more current than the Intrasys system uses. The Intrasys system uses a much higher frequency, lower current, and I know that from experience, than a lot of other LSM drive systems use. So you get that much finer, high-pitch whine coming out of the motors, but not really loud, but just you get that much finer sound coming out of there. So let's move on to the next one now. Do you know what this sound is? One more time. That is actually the sound of, on the hydraulic launch rides, that is the sound of the launch dog falling down underneath the train. The launch dog is essentially, looks more like an anti-rollback than anything else. Hold on. So we'll go back to my wood homemade arts and crafts sections. This is basically just a quick wooden copy of a B&M anti-rollback. So if you think that this guy sits here like this, and then as it's going up the lift hill, it's doing this number. Right, so this pad is sliding along the bottom of the teeth, and it's locking in place. So the clunking sound you're hearing is essentially on the hydraulic launch rides. The launch dog, kind of like this guy, is locked in the up position. Nothing goes underneath it. And then that sound that you hear is basically as it's getting into position and the catch wagon is there, the launch dog is basically just releasing and it's falling down. So it's up like that, and then as the catch wagon or as the launch sled comes back into place and it's ready, it simply just drops down. And that dropping down, that's the clunk you hear. You notice you hear that clunk right as the train starts to roll backwards. And then this guy actually slides into place and latches on. Moving along from that, bet you can guess this next one then. Did you guess it right? Yep. Those are the sound of the brake fins lowering down into the track. Those brake fins, those assemblies, what they are is they're on pneumatic pistons or pneumatic rams underneath there that are spring loaded into the up position. So those are pushed up constantly, and then when the ride says, okay, we're ready to launch, go ahead and lower the brakes, the valve opens and sends air pressure to the pneumatic ram and causes the ram to retract. And it's compressing that spring when it does that. So when the ride goes under a stop, if you blow an air line, if you lose air pressure, anything like that, the pressure leaves out from those cylinders and those brakes come back up. But the sound that you're actually hearing is on the ends of the brakes. There's two mechanical guides that keep that fin straight up and down. Those guides are set into a track that keep the fin from doing this back and forth. That actually is what absorbs the braking force. So what you're hearing is that when that piston is told to drive to the lower position, those slides come down and they physically hit mechanical stops on the front and back. And what you're listening to is the sounds of those mechanical stops. Basically, as they come down, they go ever so slightly, because they typically don't go straight down at the same time. But very slightly, hear one side hit before the other, but then you hear that times all the brake fins all the way down there. So you get lots of that. So you get just a as all the fins mechanically bang on the bottom, because when they're down, they're not just sitting down, they're actually being pulled and compressed down at the same time. So that's a sound when they say, okay, launch fins down, air fills up into those cylinders, and then you hear those fins go down. That's also the same reason why when the fins come back up, you hear the air hissing out of them at the same time, because when those fins come back up, they're simply just letting the air out of the cylinders and the spring is returning them back up. So no sound going down except for the clunk at the bottom. And then when they come back up, you typically hear psh as they come back up because the air is releasing from them. Okay, next noise. A lot of you probably got that right off the bat, right? All right, so here's what that sound is. That is on, again, if you've noticed, we're talking about a hydraulic launch ride here. That is down at the very end. There is a set of pulleys or sheaves down at the end that allow that cable force to go from straight forward to arc down and go over the drum in the control room in the back. So those are typically a nylon wheel because they need that. I mean the ones that you would use on a like an aerial lift where you have buckets riding on the things, they typically have a rubber liner in the center, but I believe those guys are flat nylon on those simply because of the speed. But actually what you're hearing is the cable itself wrapping over those wheels as it goes by. So there is not only a lot of speed that happens there with that whole assembly speeding up while that launch is happening, but there is an absolute massive amount of pressure pushing downward on that assembly as that cable is getting arced over all those wheels. And you got to remember, it's all those wheels times 2 because there's 2 launch cables. So what you're hearing is just the stress of the cable going over those wheels. That's another reason why that cable has to be kept wet, because it produces a lot of heat as it passes over those wheels. You don't want to blow those wheels out. More importantly, you don't want to put that heat in the cable and cause a premature cable failure. So that's one of the reasons water is on that cable. The main reason water is on that cable is because the launch sled that's going down the track, there's no wheels on it. It's actually hydroplaning down there. So there's water spraying up inside there, and that sled just hydroplanes all the way down, and that's also lubrication. So one of those things, reason why water sprays off of everything when those rides go. Next one, this is going to be a fun one. You may or may not know this sound. It might be hard to hear. It might play it a couple times. Without the video, some of you might be like, that just sounds like static. I don't know what that is. Okay, so let's talk about the ride real quick. Let's just go over the ride. All right, the sound is from Superman, Escape from Krypton. The sound is from Superman, Escape from Krypton at Six Flags Magic Mountain. And what this is, where the video is taken from, is if you go out to the end of a launch area where the tower is and you stand down there, the train or the coach comes right overhead. Now, most people have the same experience. I mean, I did it myself when I first went there. It's like, oh man, the track is on the mountain and it's covered by dirt and trees and everything else. And you can kind of hear the coach coming, but then when it comes out over that open area, it sounds like a jet fighter taken off. I mean, just this massive amount of sound, and then it goes up that tower and it gets quiet again. Comes back down the tower, and then you get that massive amount of sound as it going down there. Now, most people will tell you, well, that's because the sound is reflecting off of everything, and then up in the hill, in the mountain there, the sound has nowhere to go, so it reflects up and out. And then as it passes over that opening, where you could stand down there to take this video, the sound comes down, and you can hear it. That's actually not the case what's happening there. So when Intamin built this ride, you might notice the track is just two I-beams with a metal rail in the center. Well, the reason for that is because they wanted it to precisely guide down the center of that track. So on the I-beams, they put the road wheels for the coach, and then underneath the I-beams, they put the upstop wheels. You still need guide wheels, right? So what they did is that they said, all right, in the center of the coach, there's this special wheel carrier truck assembly, one in the front, one in the back, and it has these wheels on it. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 wheels per truck, 8 wheels total, one for the front, one for the back. And these things sit there and they have steel wheels on a steel track. And the things put a ton of pressure onto that center track. And then you're like, oh, okay, so it's that what's making the noise? No, still not quite. Bear with me on this one. So what happens is that Intamin did not design that wheel carrier assembly to turn. It's always straight no matter what. The curve is very gradual, but it's still a curve. So what happens is as that coach is accelerating down that track, getting it to its final speed of 89 miles an hour or 100, whatever you want to say, right? As it's getting down there, it's those steel wheels, all 8 of them crushed onto that track in the center, are starting to make a bunch of noise. A lot of noise? No. Just a bunch of noise. Kind of, that's like about the same amount of noise of like a Larson loop running, right? Really annoying, but not super annoying. So as it gets to this curve, the wheels are now going this way, but now the track that it's on is now starting to do this number because that track is going up and the wheels are still going straight. So as it's going up that curve, that sound, that jet engine screaming, squelching sound that you hear as it goes up that curve is those steel wheels scraping across the face of that steel track. That's the sound of the track going up and the wheels going straight. So they essentially chatter and scrape that entire time as they're going up there. There is lubrication on that center rail, but there's not a ton out there, and it's definitely not enough to quiet the assembly down. So what you get is you might get 90 to 100 decibels of sound coming down that straightaway and up at the top of the tower going up that way as well. But in that curve right there, I'm not sure what the numbers actually are, but in that curve it goes from like 100 decibels to 120 decibels as it goes up. And then you can hear it much better because it's overhead. But it's not simply just a fact that it's going from covered to overhead at that point in time. There's the actual sound is coming from the track turning and the steel wheels going straight on that. That was really interesting to find out. Like, that was quite amazing when I found that out. I was like, oh wow, that's okay. Because normally wheel carriers turn with the track, but in this case, since they were built independent of your roads and upstops, there was nothing to turn. Like, even if you were to say I want them to turn with the track, well, that ride only uses one road and one upstop. They don't turn either, so, but they're round, so they follow the track naturally. So that was pretty interesting. Moving along. All right, here's the sound that you would typically hear before an awesome ride starts. I don't have any explanation behind that. I just love that ride. That's cool, right? I love that sound too. Here is the sound of me asking you that at this point in time in the video, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. That way you know when I release videos in the future, it pops up in your feed and say, hey look, another video by Ryan the Ride Mechanic's come out. That's pretty cool. I'm going to watch that guy again, because he doesn't seem like he knows what he's doing, but I still want to watch it anyway. I want to correct all his grammar and spelling errors too. I got plenty of them. So like and subscribe, and you can see all my spelling errors in the future. Back to the noise. All right, here's the next sound. It might sound like a bunch of chatter happening, but you probably might recognize this one. Kind of just sounds like a lot of chatter, right? Does the video help at all? Let's try the video with it. Okay, so what that is that on the B&M rides in particular, as the train's getting up to the lift, it's not only engaging the booster drives that feed the train on the lift hill, but you have straight sections of anti-rollback rail at the bottom of the lift before it goes up the curve. And that is to prevent the train from rolling backwards if it short shoots a lift for some reason. If it doesn't make the lift, it at least stays at the base. It just doesn't go all the way up. So what you're actually hearing when you get up there is the sound of all the anti-rollbacks hitting that flat rail before it slows down and the motors feed it onto the lift. So it sounds very chaotic. You got a bunch of stuff clunking and hitting at the same time. And then the train starts to be fed onto the lift hill. At the very beginning of that, right as the train starts to curve up, if you listen super carefully, I'm not saying it's on these videos, but I'm just saying if you listen super carefully on the ride, you might actually be able to hear the chain dog go a couple thunks up onto the lift hill before it bites in. But on B&Ms, they're really good about feeding that train onto the lift hill at the exact same speed as the chain. So you rarely, if ever, hear that chain dog. But you can barely ever feel the separation for when it actually hooks up onto the chain. The two speeds are matched so close with each other. They do a great job at that. All right, for the next one, it's not really a sound. I just wanted to say the dinosaurs look at Chuck Norris the wrong way. And that is why we no longer have dinosaurs. Moving along, can you guess what this sound is? Now I know what you're saying. You're like, man, that was the sound we've already heard from earlier on. That's the booster wheels of the inverts clanking away on there. It's like close. There's another sound happening at the same exact time as that. This one, you can hear the booster wheels up there thumping for sure. You can hear them going thump thump You can, oh, I'm sorry. You can hear the booster wheels up there for sure. They go thump, 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 thump. The sound I'm listening to is the one that goes thump, 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 thump. Listen to it again. Okay, do you know what that sound is? The one that goes thump, 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 thump. All right, so on roller coasters, almost all of them run across a transfer track. This is a track assembly that's meant to slide from one side to the other, rotate, do something like that. Well, there is no real finite bridge on these things. B&M just recently started doing the split ones where they come apart like this. But most of them are just it's a gap in the track. And most of the time the gap is not very small either. It's, 6 to 8 millimeters of a gap in the track where there's just nothing there. So at two spots, when the train is entering the transfer track and when the train is leaving the transfer track, what you're hearing mainly is the road wheels going over that gap, going thump thump. And the reason there's two is because there's typically two road wheels. So you hear it twice for each set that goes by. Coach 1, thump thump. Coach 2, thump thump. That's the sound of those wheels passing over that transfer track as you go by. Now, interestingly enough, I don't have a video for it, just I didn't get it. But on wooden roller coasters, because there is such a rise over run that has to happen and has to keep a 3 or 4 degree slope on there to move wooden roller coasters forward, the transfer track, there's no drive on those things. They're just gravity sliding across there. So the transfer track on that gap I'm talking about, they're not at the same level like this. I'm going to exaggerate this, but if this is your track side and this is your transfer side, the transfer side is dropped. So that when it goes from track to transfer, it drops down, sometimes literally a 1/4 of an inch drop down. And then again on the other side, from your transfer track to your run track again, there is also that differential of about a 1/4 inch sometimes. So, although you're hearing those thumps on like a B&M coaster or something like that, when you ride Woodies and you get to the transfer area, a lot of times you can literally feel the train thump down as you go over those transfer gaps. And that's because if not, the train can literally get stuck in the divot that is a level section of track. So there has to be a bit of space to roll the train forward on its own. Otherwise, they tend to get stuck there. I asked the wooden roller coaster engineer, I'm like, just stuck there? And he was like, yeah, if you stop a train around the transfer area and try to start it again, a lot of times it won't start because one of the road wheels found that level open gap and just parked itself right there. Wow, okay, that was interesting. Okay, next sound, what is it? Need to hear it again? Alright, so what that is one of the famed S&S towers. Once the ride goes up, you get that big.
There you go.
As it reaches the top. So a lot of people, what is that? The S&S tower is very simple. It's just a cylinder with a piston on the inside, moving from one side to the other. There's nothing fancy on the inside of these things, but most of them have 4 pistons in there, 4 different sides with 4 different pistons. So what they did was they said, hey, up at the very top, we want to deaccelerate the ride right there. Well, because they're pulleys running from one side to the other, and people are like, are you going to make a video about this? It's like, calm down. Yeah, I'll do that. So on the other side, you get the pulley that runs down. So that means that when it's up at the top, that piston is down towards the bottom. And what you're hearing is that as the piston passes this certain area, about 30 feet from the bottom of the ride, that piston literally passes by a bunch of holes in the side of the cylinder. That's it. You have air compressing that piston and pushing it down, which is causing the gondola to go up as the piston goes down. And then once the piston runs past that certain point, it hits a bunch of holes in there, which causes all that pressure pushing the piston down to just go out the side. Super loud, very aggressive. So they take that sound, that all that air that's coming out of all four of those cylinders at the same time, and they run it through these big mufflers on the side of the tower. Those mufflers have a special baffling system on the inside there, so it could take a lot of pressure and a lot of CFM of air, cubic feet per minute, a lot of CFM of air coming through that system and safely just go out the sides and not blow your eardrums out at the same time. So that's what that is. That's what that sound is, that big bang at the end. That's simply just air escaping from the cylinders times 4. That's what it is. A different one, however, how about this one? Don't know if you could tell by that, but it's a much louder bang. What ride are we talking about? Well, that's Max Force. That was a great ride. Super cool. So, as we were just talking about the S&S tower, where, gondola goes up, piston comes down, and it just goes by, and there's a hole, and the air comes out the side. All right, well, you take that assembly working like this, right? And you take it for Max Force and just turn it on its side. That's all Max Force is essentially a large S&S tower turned on its side. And instead of using 4 cylinders to generate the force, they use 1 cylinder. One very, very, very large cylinder. I was actually told that cylinder is 4 feet in diameter. That thing is huge. But it's the same concept. There's a piston at the other end, roller coaster on this end. As that piston is energized and they push air behind it and that air compresses, it pushes the piston down. The cable comes back around to this side, grabs the train, and as that piston comes down, the train goes forward. Same thing, about 40 or 50 feet from the end, because it's a little bit bigger, right? The piston passes by a whole bunch of holes in the side of that cylinder. And I'd love to say it was some really special thing that they did a lot of this, but the people that work on that said, nope, it's just a bunch of holes in the side of the cylinder. And it's like, is that why it sounds like a cannon when it goes off? And they're like, yeah, that's why it sounds like a cannon when it goes off, because that one essentially doesn't have a muffler on the side of it like the S&S towers do. So that one's way out, far and away. They've probably angled some baffles there so it shoots off in the other direction, but that is essentially an about a foot diameter worth of all these holes put together that suddenly just vent 100 psi when that piston comes back by through there. And that's where you get the really loud bang that Max Force makes. And you say, well, that's not too incredibly loud. It's like, yeah, you got to remember, you're 100 feet away when you're in the station. You're 100 feet away from where that guy is exhausting. So it's not that loud 100 feet away, which means it's really friggin' loud if you're standing there next to the thing, which I doubt anyone could actually stand next to it. That seems pretty dangerous. All right, next one. What's this one sound like? Okay, some of you are like, I don't get it. It sounds just like a regular roller coaster. Granted. All right, Here's the video for it. Looks just like a regular roller coaster, right? Here's another video of the same exact ride at a different park. Why is it that one I could stand there, you could hear in the video, you could hear just calmly people talking next to it, and the other one sounds like it's going to shake itself to pieces? Well, that is actually the difference between urethane and nylon wheels. So that first roller coaster I showed you is Scream down at Magic Mountain. It's got the infamous gravel in the track for sound deadening, and it's got nylon wheels. So it still sounds really, really loud. Now the other one, that's Medusa at Discovery Kingdom. It also has gravel in the track, but it uses urethane wheels on everything. So it sounds much quieter. The two trains are roughly the same. The rides are the same size, not the same configuration, but close to it. But one is a screamer, the other one's not. And it's running all urethane wheels. Now the deal is, if you run urethane wheels in the rider, they typically run much slower, but they are much quieter to have around residential areas, and they definitely tear up the train and the track less, from less vibration in those things. So the difference is between nylon and urethane wheels with those two roller coasters. All right, let's listen to the next one. So this is a brake releasing. What about the next one? That's also a brake releasing. What am I pointing out the difference here for? Okay, so the first one, when the train comes in, listen to it. Because the train will come in, pass over the brake, through the brake, and then you'll hear air release. Listen to it. The next one, you'll hear the train come in, comes to a stop, and then the air releases. So the question is, why does the air release in two different spots? Okay, so this is the difference between a normally open and a normally closed brake. So on the first one, which was a B&M ride, those brakes are set up to where there's a very large spring underneath that brake assembly, and it is holding those bars closed. So when the train comes up to it, it slows the train down. Now, to make those work and stop the train, you don't need anything. It's mounted into the track. It works every time, regardless. No big deal. You want the train to go through that brake? Well, that's when you need air pressure. You have to put air pressure inside of it. So the brake is closed and applied. Then the train comes in and hits that closed brake. So I energize it with air. It opens. As the train passes through, this is why I was pointing that out in the video, once the train passes through it and the train is cleared, then you let the air back out and the brake closes back down. So on a brake that is normally closed, like B&M brakes, they require no air pressure to apply, but they require air pressure to open and let the train through. All right, on the second brake, those were brakes off of an SLC. The SLC Vekoma brakes in general, they use what I consider normally open brakes, which means if you take the air pressure away from it. And notice I just said air pressure, not power. So if you take the air pressure away from that brake completely, they have a backup air system on it. I'm talking about I'm maliciously going to cut the line going to the bladders and completely null the brake out. So when you cut the line going to the bladders and all the air just goes out of it, there's actually 2 leaf springs, one on each side, that actually cause that brake to open. And with no air pressure, it will not stop the train. And it will not close again. So that's what I consider normally open, or it's failed open brake. Now, Vekoma has 2 air systems on there. One is a low pressure trim, one is a high pressure emergency. There is also a backup reservoir at each one of the brakes that has a check valve which prevents air from coming in. So you can literally fill all the brakes up with air and then you could blow the main air compressor apart, and there's still enough air in the rest of the tanks everywhere to run the ride for a couple cycles. Not that you would do that. Each one of those brakes also has a pressure switch safetied off of it to where if the pressure drops in one of those particular brakes, it shuts the ride off. It throws it into an E-stop and won't let it go any further. So that is the reason why when you hear those guys come in, they go clack, 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 clack. And then you hear the air psh, because it is releasing the air that it was using to stop the ride. And then the brakes open up. And then after that, all you hear is the clack of the brake shut back because it's re-energizing those bladders with air pressure again. So again, we're going from stopped to open to close. For the B&M style brakes, to go from close to open back to close, you hear the brake go like this, clunk, psh, closes. For the Vekoma style brakes, you hear them go nothing, psh, clunk. So you can identify what type of brake it is simply by when the air pressure releases from it. And then here's another one I got off of a spinning roller coaster. This one's really tricky. Try to listen to see what type of a brake it is. I'll play it again for you. This one's quite tricky, but it's mainly because of the video. But basically, so when that coach comes up to it, it goes in, and then that guy was open, right? Train came into an open brake, and then it went psh, and closed the brake just momentarily to trim. That's a trim function. So it trimmed it, slowed it down a little bit, and then put air pressure back into the assembly and opened the brake back up. So because that release of air and then the coach slowed down right there, that tells me that it is a normally closed or spring applied brake, air released, spring applied. Okay, then the last one is kind of a weird one because I want you to pay attention to the very beginning. It's not really the train moving or anything, but there's a little bit of noise that happens right before the train moves. Listen to it.
Wait, all clear.
Did you hear it? It was like air releasing right before it left. I'll listen to it again.
Wait, all clear.
Okay, so this is where people will say, well, is that the brakes releasing? What is that air, that long, that drained out? RMCs use these platen assemblies underneath the train to release the restraints. They are done in 2 steps. There is actually 2 small cylinders that operate a clamp, and the thing sits open like this underneath the train. So when the platen is told to come up to release the cylinders, which means the train's in position and go ahead and release the cylinders, those 2 little cylinders close that clamp assembly, and then another bigger cylinder underneath pushes that whole assembly up. And the reason for those two smaller ones is it guides off of the brake fin and holds itself centered, so it always puts the little release pins correctly on both sides. So what you're hearing is actually when they dispatch, because you gotta remember, up until they press the dispatch buttons, they still have feedback from the restraints showing that they're all closed and locked. So when they press a dispatch button, you're actually hearing all the air bleed out of those clamps, and then the big cylinder underneath, it is spring-loaded in the down position. So that guy is just slowly lowering down back into the track. And then once they all read that they're down, the train's allowed to dispatch and go forward. So that's what you're hearing. You're hearing all those platens bleed off air pressure and slowly come back down. The opposite side of that, you won't hear them come up really. Maybe if you get some noisy ones and its station's really quiet, you might be able to hear them thunk up underneath the train, but much harder to do, especially with the park open. Closed, you can hear it just fine, but not with the park open. Okay, I think I've done enough for this video. I had fun doing it. I had a lot of fun putting all these little noises together. You noticed that I did a lot of screen recording. I left all the links and stuff down there. I put links in the description of the video too. But I used a lot of people's videos, just little bits and pieces of them. I'm not trying to rip off people's videos or anything, so I did give credit. That was one of my ways, aside from the links in the description itself. I made sure to leave their channel information up there, or at least put the channel information on there so you know where the original videos came from, because definitely not my videos on there, and I'm not trying to take credit for theirs to start with. So please, if you like some of those videos that you saw, go find the channel. I have the links and I have the channel information up on there too. And go subscribe to their channel if you're not already, because that's a good one for them. I think there's one more sound that I need to do, and that is the sound of the video ending. So if you listen really carefully, you can hear me say, "I'm Ryan the Ride Mechanic. Remember, stay off the air gates." Bye.